One of the things that I say to folks on a regular basis is this. I got this from a guy named Kelly Talamo. We can only fear in the direction of our hope. So if you want to find out what it is that deep down inside you really long for, what it is that you want, what it is that you worship, and I don't want to get too uber spiritual with that term because worship has a broad spectrum. I mean, worship is ultimately just declaring the worth of something. So you can worship Georgia football, and that's okay. Out there, if your ultimate worship is going to Georgia football, that's not okay. That's a bad thing. You'll end up depressed. Okay, especially if Gurley doesn't return. You're in trouble long term. I just want you to know that. All right, so it's okay to do that. If you want to find out what it is that your soul really longs for, though, what do you fear? And what keeps you awake at night? When you have those moments, maybe you're driving at some distance from one place to the next. It could be your commute to work here in Atlanta. That could take you 40, 45 minutes. And what is it that you find that your mind gets drifted away when you think, man, I really do fear this right here, because we can only fear in the direction of our hope. I think at the end of the day, what it is that every person that's on the globe, every person ultimately fears is this. What if it, whatever it may be, really isn't true? One of the fears for believers, if you've never had this fear, then you either haven't thought deeply enough about it, or you just have not walked with God long enough for this to become a part of your journey. But you wake up and you say, what if none of this really is true? I mean, what if this is a fairy tale? What if it's a well-constructed book that has been altered over the years, and it certainly has incredible lessons, valuable lessons about how we construct our lives and the best way to interact with others and build a business and the principles of raising a family and friendship, etc. It's got all that, but what if it ultimately isn't true? I won't walk you through my story, but it really was not that long ago. I was a pastor and found myself in that exact scenario. And it was in between one airport and another was the other part of the world, and I was going to pick up 2 more adopted children, and it just went black in my mind. It went dark, and I couldn't think anymore, and I came back and spent several days talking to my wife, and then made the decision, what if he really is the ogre that I fear he is, meaning God? And that lasted for quite some time. Now, keep in mind, folks, I'd been in ministry at that point for almost 20 years. Ministry. Teaching this, it's a part of what I do. It's a part of what I've been called to do, is to talk about this Bible, to talk specifically about who it says God is and what it is that it says he does. And after that much time, I thought, man, I'm ready to cash in. I'm done with this. What if it's just not true? That's a tremendous fear. There's a really smart guy up in New York called Tim Keller. He's written several books. And he is consulted all over the world. People want to pick his brain on various subjects. And one of my favorite interviews I ever heard with him, I actually to this day have only heard a couple of sermons that he's ever preached. I've read 3 of his books, but I've listened to several little interviews. That's where I find him to be the most helpful for me. And he's been interviewed by the BBC. They asked him this question. They said, do you still struggle with doubt? And this was on the tail end of a conversation that they had about his throat cancer. He had developed cancer, and for someone that uses their voice for a living, be it an actor or a singer or a preacher or a teacher or whatever, if someone uses their voice for a living, that's a pretty intimidating thing. I asked him, do you still struggle with doubt? And he said, I have more doubt now than I ever have. And yet I have more certainty now than I ever have. The interviewer, a bit perplexed, and I looked at him and said, how can that be? And he said, Jesus. He said, there's a lot of questions that I have about some of the details and the nuances of this Bible, but I am more assured now of Jesus. This is where we want to end our time, and I promise you it's going to be brief on my end. At the end of the day, what you have to do when you're investigating the claims of Christ, when you're investigating Christianity, you have to come to terms with, what do I do with Jesus? And there's a story we won't look at tonight, but this is really the crux, in my opinion, of all of the scriptures. It can all be kind of brought to this one particular passage that's found in 2 of the Gospels, but it's a story, it's an interaction between Jesus and a man named Pilate. And while those 2 are interacting with one another, they interact, they have questions, Jesus answers a little bit, and sometimes Jesus is just dead silent on there. And then Pilate actually looks out to the crowd and he says, now which one do you want? Do you want Jesus or do you want this guy named Barabbas? Barabbas is a notorious sinner, notorious criminal. And the crowds were stirred at that point, and all the Jesus supporters had kind of just abandoned him. They had left, and they started that process the night before on Thursday night. By the time we get to this place on Friday morning, they're all gone. And so the crowds out there are just hysterical. They're screaming out, Barabbas, free Barabbas. And so then Pilate says this, what then shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? And this is the question of Christianity. What shall I do with Jesus? Not what do I do with grace, not what do I do with mercy, not what do I do with prayer, not what do I do even with the scriptures. What do I do with Jesus? If you take Jesus out of the equation, you have no Christianity. It's not like any other religion that's been started. It's not like he just started this thing and left it. He is Christianity. So this is the question that I ask regularly to folks when we meet, and I say we can talk for months on end. We can talk about all kinds of nuances, and believe me, there's plenty of them to talk about in the scriptures. There's plenty of little side trails to get going down, and sometimes folks ask some really, really good questions that I have no idea, and I get a chance to them. I don't know. That's a great one. But I love coming back to what about Jesus? So listen to this. I'm not going to teach tremendously amount on it, but I want you to listen to it as if it's the first time that you've heard it. And if you are here and you're a skeptic, and keep in mind, we use the term skeptic in a good light. We think skeptic, yay, good term there, not a bad term. If you would put yourself in that camp, this may actually be the first time you've heard it, but Jesus is with his disciples. And he says this, now it happened that as he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he asked them, now, who do the crowds say that I am? And they answered, John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of old has risen. Jesus asked the question, it's very simple. Who do people say that I am? If I were to ask you that tonight, turn it on me, it'd be a very easy question to answer. Who do people say that I am? Now, most of you would say, they don't say anything because they don't know who you are. Jesus is a pretty popular dude. Who do people say that I am? Well, some people say you're kind of like Elijah or Moses, or you're definitely one of the prophets. You're definitely one of the big hitters. You're one of those that people want to follow. We really love the way that you tell stories. People think that you're something special. Then he said to them, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, the Christ of God. Now, his answer cannot be any more pristine. It is perfect. It is so perfect, he doesn't even realize how good of an answer he has given. You are the anointed one. You are the Messiah. You are the chosen one. You are the one who is sent by God to us. But he wasn't at all expecting Jesus to do something different. Now, earlier than this, Jesus had told them, by the way, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to die. They weren't expecting that. I've walked you through this many times in the past, but they're expecting Jesus to set up this earthly kingdom and palace, and they're going to rule from on high. And then they even had the nerve and audacity to come back, and they asked Jesus, a couple of them did on one occasion, hey, can we sit like on your right and on your left? I mean, when we're in kingdom, we're in glory, could we just kind of hang out beside you, that place of honor? And he says, you have no idea what you're asking. And Jesus had told them earlier, by the way, I'm going to die. And he told them this on more than one occasion. Never connected with them. He strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and on the third day be raised. Again, this is not the only time that he said this. There's another passage I could walk you to in which he gets even really specific. They're passing by the temple. And they're looking at this temple that was constructed, and it doesn't have all of the glory that Solomon's temple did. Solomon, the son of David, the last of the kings that would have both of the kingdoms. There was a northern part and a southern part. There was Israel and there was Judah. And before they had separated, Solomon was the last of the three kings to be able to lead this group of people. And Solomon had so much stinking money, it's absurd. Most biblical scholars don't even think we can guesstimate about how much money he had. When he went about a building task, it was so audacious. It was, he was just showing off at several times. But the temple that he built was for the Lord. It was his dad's dream. His dad didn't get a chance to build that thing. It's because of his own sin, but God said, your son's going to build. So his son built it, and this temple was just amazing. And after him, they had a whole line of people. It wasn't from Solomon, a whole line of people that then come in and they take over. And then it's not but just a little bit of time before that northern kingdom was overtaken by the Assyrians in 722 BC in a brutal fashion. And then the southern kingdom hangs on for a little while longer, and this is where the temple is. And so it's not until you get to 586 BC when they finally got wicked enough, and then God took his hands of protection away from them, and he allowed Nebuchadnezzar to come in, and then the Babylonians just kind of wrecked this thing. And the temple was destroyed. And never again to be returned to its splendor. Now they built another one. Herod had this temple built. And when it was finalized, people went, ugh. So they're coming up on that temple, and Jesus says, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're going to destroy this temple, and I'm going to build it again in 3 days. And most everyone around just laughed and went, okay, buddy, good. You're that kind of a guy. But what the scriptures tell us that Jesus was ultimately not talking about building. It wasn't talking about brick and mortar. He was talking about his own body. Paul would later on tell us that we are the temple of God. He's talking about this body that's going to be destroyed, and on the third day it's going to come back again. Now, what happens after this in Luke is that exactly what Jesus said would happen, happened. Much to the dismay of literally everyone. Nobody saw this coming. There was even one of his disciples that when he was in the garden takes out his little sword, this tiny little sword right here. He's a fisherman, for crying out loud. And he's got all these detachment of soldiers that are around. And he takes off the ear of one of the guys because he's ready to fight for Jesus, because nobody's going to take Jesus and kill him. Even though Jesus said on multiple occasions, by the way, I need to die. They're fighting for him, and yet when push came to shove, they all abandoned him. And so he goes through several unfair trials and finally gets to the point where he's there before Pilate. Pilate says, who do you want? They say, give us Barabbas. You take Jesus and crucify him. And then Jesus goes off. He's beaten brutally. Almost unrecognizable at that point, yet not a single bone was broken. That was prophesied hundreds of years before that this guy would die, and yet he would not have a broken bone. It was also prophesied he'd have a little hole in his side. It was also prophesied exactly where he would be born. It was prophesied about what family he would be in. It was prophesied where he would come from. It was prophesied about 300 things about Jesus and his life and death and his resurrection. And nobody saw it coming. And Jesus finally goes to that cross. And what should have taken days to get him dead because he was so exhausted, it literally just took hours. And so about the 6th hour, Jesus finally breathes out his last breath and he dies. And that's a Friday. Saturday, he's dead. Sunday, the 3rd day, he gets up out of the grave. There's a huge stone. This huge boulder that was rolled over in front of it, and that boulder's gone. And some people come to find out if he's there. And so first it's a couple of women that show up and they see that he's not there. But in fact, there's actually an angel that's over there. And the angel says, by the way, he's alive and he's coming back. He's going to talk to you. And so they run, and they tell the disciples about this. And so two of the disciples sprint down. One outruns the other, sees that there's nothing there. And they are still bamboozled. And then Jesus shows up. And Jesus talks to them on a couple of occasions. And he tells them, by the way, do you remember what I said? Now here's the point of telling you all this before I close. If I were to tell you right now, I want you to know, folks, I am God. I want you to know that I have special insight, discernment, and you may not believe this, but I'm divine. You would say, great, it's been a good run here for you at Perimeter Dave, and you'd sayonara. But what if I told you, today's Thursday. And 6 months from now, I'm going to be walking across the street. I'm going to get hit by a bus. By the way, that street's going to be right over here in front of Perimeter. It's going to be 141. It's going to happen early in the morning. That bus is going to run me over, and then they're going to call the paramedics. The paramedics are going to come by. They're going to say that I'm dead. They're going to confirm it. And then I'm going to go to the morgue. And while I'm in the morgue, while they're preparing my body, for its permanent departure, I'm going to sit up and go, whew, I feel so much better. And then I'm going to come out. I'm going to talk to you and you and you, and I'm going to hang out for a while, and then I'm going to go to heaven. You would say I'm nuts, but folks, what if it happened? What if 6 months from now, I'm walking down early in the wee hours of the morning down 141, and a bus, boom, goes, and paramedics are called, dead. I'm in the morgue, and come and talk to you. Would you then think something different about me? The whole thing hinges on his death, his burial, and his resurrection. The whole thing. Have you ever wondered why plenty of folks over the years have taken plenty of shots at various components of the Bible and said, well, it can't really be the Red Sea. It has to be the Reed Sea. And they couldn't have really crossed along that much body of water. It had to be this. And it couldn't have really been a fish that swallowed them. Have you ever wondered why they take so many shots at so many different things in Scripture, and yet nobody can disprove that he was raised from the dead? Nobody has ever produced bones. His body is gone. And for me, the centerpiece of the whole thing, the whole reason I came back to my senses 5 years ago was because I could not get past this one central truth. I've been walking with people for years talking about this exact thing. And as I tried to discredit all of the New Testament, I came to this one sticking point and said, I cannot unbelieve that Jesus was dead and he was raised again from the dead. And he showed up not just to a handful of people, but to hundreds of people. And they saw him. And it's gone down in books of history. And nobody has been able to disprove that. And the fact that he predicted it gives me reason to say, the dude is not just a prophet. I think he's exactly who he said he is. And who did he say? He said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And nobody is made right with God outside of me. So in your investigation of Christianity, just who do you say that Jesus is? Close with this. It's not really an emotional illustration. It's not one that's going to cause you to ooh and to awe. It's to try to get across a central point. Jesus would be the most arrogant man who ever existed by claiming to be the only way that we can be made right with God. For someone to have the audacity to say, I am the greatest thing that has ever existed. I am the only person who can make you right with your eternal maker. To say that, one has to be extraordinarily arrogant. Or you have to be right. So when you think about Jesus, don't just stop at saying Jesus is a really good guy. It's a really good dude. He did some really good things. He fought for the little guy. He was out for the poor. He was that. Absolutely, he did that. But either he was insane or he is exactly who he said he is. Why did he come? He came to deal with my sin and then to take me back to the Father. He did not come to make an improvement upon my life and your life. He came to actually fix you. I had surgery when I was in the 8th grade, and that surgery, they opened my chest up and went from here to here. I still bear the scar to this day. I still cannot feel right here, right close to where this scar is. I have no feeling. I had a chest that grew inward. My bones literally went inside. And mine was so significant and severe, it was starting to push my heart over to the left. So much so that they predicted in between the ages of 18 and 23, I would no longer have the capacity and the ability for my heart to beat because it would shut off the blood flow. So the options in front of us were this. You can either have surgery, and that surgery will be awfully invasive. We'll break the bones. We'll cut you open. It's open heart surgery. You'll be exposed to some things. There's danger that's involved in here. We'll reconstruct the bones, put a plate there, stainless steel rods, and then your bones will grow back inward a little bit because that's your DNA, but they won't grow back so much so that you'll die. That's option number one. Okay, what's option number two? We can take a needle, inject inside of your skin, and we can pull that skin up off of your chest, and it will look like there's no hole there. So what happens in between 18 and 23? Oh, you die. Is that a real option? So I can either live or I can die, and you're worried about a scar. When we look to Jesus to improve our lives, we're saying, I just want a little bit of an example from Jesus. I want to learn some things from him so that I can get much better. Whereas what Jesus says is, I came to give you complete and total reconstruction. In fact, what he actually tells us, I came to take this dead heart out and to give you a beating heart. He came to deal with our sin, not just to mask it. And the only person that can do that is Jesus. So, who do you say that he is? Let me pray.